Lynn with Stanley, Leong. COVID-19 has not only led to the loss of lives, but livelihoods. For many companies, the traditional way of doing business has been severely impacted, and the same applies for the food system.
Which beckons these questions. What are the current challenges facing the agricultural sector resulting from COVID-19? And how will you and I as consumers be impacted if these aren't addressed? And can we expect food prices to rise? Well, here to tell us more is Grahame Dixie, who is the Executive Director of Grow Asia. They are a multi-stakeholder partnership platform which brings together Southeast Asia's smallholder farmers, governments, companies, NGOs, and other stakeholders to develop inclusive and sustainable value chains and initiative. Grahame, thank you for joining us today on CNA 938.
Pleasure to be here.
Now, Grahame, how did Grow Asia come into being in the first place? Take us back in time.
Yeah, so we're a spin-off of the World Economic Forum. And in 2008, there was a global food crisis going on. Food prices were rising, export countries were bringing up trade barriers. If you were an importer like Japan, Oman, or Singapore, you were worried about your long-term supplies. And you had, on top of that, you had a financial crisis. And so they gathered together at Davos, 17 CEOs of major agribusinesses, plus a group of ministers of agriculture. And they decided that they needed a new vision for agriculture. And one of the things that span out of that was Grow Asia.
Right, you talked about how Grow Asia came about because of the 2008 food crisis. How does the current situation under COVID-19 compare with that period? Are you seeing a similar crisis?
It is different. There we had real problems with the price of food. There were a number of complications about producing food, whereas the COVID situation has been sort of different. Insofar it's been patchy, its effect, and there are a number of different problems that have come out. What COVID has shown us is probably best described as it has highlighted the weaknesses in the Southeast Asian food supply chain, and similar stories come from elsewhere in the world. I think if you tease apart the causes from the symptoms, what we've seen is a change in demand. Clearly, for the supply of food and produce to the food and beverages sector, the food service sector crashed. The average consumer in the region switched to buying food that they were going to prepare at home. They showed a marked preference for product that was coming from local supply chains. And there was a really big tick up in the increase in purchases using digital platforms. And the consequences for the farming community, there was this real problem about rural logistics. People were not getting out and buying product, which meant as a farmer, you suddenly found that your sales were cut off. And the long-term implications, the short-term implications of that was that food was not getting out of the farming area and not arriving in the urban situation, so food prices went up. It also had a ripple effect, which for the farmers who couldn't sell their product didn't earn any income, which meant that they couldn't invest in the next crop. And so that there is a fear that there is a long-term impact on food supply. And some of the other things that emerged out of that was problems with cash flowing. It wasn't getting out to farmers and so on and so forth. But also on top of that, there's this very interesting difficulty that they had, that because some of their markets were cut off, such as the agribusiness sector, the food and beverages sector, meant that farmers were struggling to be able to switch to new markets. And therefore, there was an inherent problem about the system being too rigid and not enough flexibility for product being able to switch from one market to another. Over.
Right. So it looks like the supply chain issues were largely the cause of all the headaches and the issues that the farmers were facing, having to grapple with as well, compared to maybe the earlier crisis, which was really more about supply and trying to meet the demand for food all around the world. Would that be the distinctive or distinguishing factor between the two crises?
Yes, yeah, I think that's fair. I think a lot of the first one was mainly a production problem. The second one was very much a food supply problem, a food systems problem.
So we're interested to know then, Grahame, how Grow Asia is helping to solve some of these problems. What do you have in the works that are helping to alleviate these situations?
No, thanks for asking that. You see, the basic premise of Grow Asia is this, that if you can get a conversation to go on between the public sector, the private sector, and the producers and civil sector, the balance of probabilities is that they can make better decisions. And if you look at the countries who have this in place around the world, they do better than you expect in agriculture. So we applied that principle to the COVID situation. And we had, on May the 26th, we did a conference call with over 120 people online. And that include ministers of agriculture, senior policymakers, CEOs of agribusinesses, CEOs of the broader ecosystem surrounding farming organizations, development agencies. And we triggered a discussion as, what were the issues and how these might be solved. And what came out of that was the issues of, to get to the causes, one was, there's clearly the weakest point in the supply chain is the first mile connectivity to the farmer. The second one was the issue around cash flow. And the third one was around digital marketing platforms and what could be done to improve those. And so much of those problems are underpinned by improved digital operations. And so what could be done to improve the way broadband networks in the rural space? What came out of that was 4 working groups who met, each of them met 4 times. They were moderated, about 100 people signed up from that. 1/3 was from the agribusiness sector. 1/3 was from governments. About 20% was from people like the Asian Development Bank, the World Bank, those sort of development agencies, FAO, and the rest from farmer organizations and civil society. And they worked through those. So what came out of the logistics group, they did 2 clever things. One is that they brought together the global best practices on running green lanes. These are the lanes that people had mandated should be enable products such as food and agricultural inputs to flow. And in that, so those were information coming from the Food and Agriculture Organization. And coupled with that, they brought together the World Health Organization's best practices to protect people in the supply chain from being infected with COVID. So those are now distributed across the ASEAN. The second piece was very interesting. So if you think what has the incredible transformation that's happened in urban logistics, with Ninja Van and Grab and so on and so forth, digitally enhanced. But none of that is happening in the rural space. So that what you have is a few independent truckers. We have lorries going into the rural space, coming back empty. So the thought there was, could we put together a challenge fund to enable those digital magicians to come up with some open source app that would enable people in the rural space to consolidate loads so that they would be able to get product from farmer A, B, C, and D and arrange a collection and then put it out to bidding to empty back hauls and the local trucking sector. And to see if that was a way that we could improve efficiencies and lower transaction costs. I mean, because one of the things that came out in those discussions in Indonesia, that when you drill into that first mile connectivity, the lorries who pick up product from farm gates, they charge very high margins. And so we could take out cost. So that was the first piece. The second piece was about cash. There is a broader story going on that all our economy is becoming less cash. And farmers don't take credit cards. They want cash. And what emerged was a wonderful story out of Cambodia and being echoed in Myanmar of mobile money. What this enables people to do is to pay farmers digitally, and that they can take that digital signal down to a local agent and convert that signal into cash. And so that was a way that unless we can help that to happen, we can imagine that the farming community would become more isolated and more marginalized in a changing economy. But it also opens up other opportunities for smart subsidies, for cash transfers, for credit and finance, and for farmers to be able to collectively buy inputs and so on to keep the costs down. But they are a critical part of the third piece that came out, which what we've seen is this increasing interest in people buying food from digital platforms. In China, for example, Pinduoduo does $20 billion of direct sales from farmers to consumers using digital platforms. And we've seen Tanihub in Indonesia developing and so on. But one of the key elements of that, for that to work, you need a good local infrastructure, roads, trucking services, and an effective logistics platform, i.e. what Working Group 1 referred to. You need to also have e-wallets so people can pay for product and farmers can be paid by e-money rather than by actual cash money.
That's
So that was the second group that came out. Sorry, yes, over to you.
Yeah, sorry, Graham. It's just that time isn't quite on our side. But so
Okay.
it sounds like there's a strong logistics and mobile network that would be required to solve the issues that you've just talked about. Where's the money coming from to pay for all of this infrastructure?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's a fascinating question. So when mobile telephone companies started operating, governments realized that the one thing they wouldn't want to invest in is rural infrastructure, so that they mandated a portion of their turnover went into what is called a universal access fund. And those funds have been mounting up but hardly accessed, so that there is often a wodge of money sitting in a government bank account which has yet to be realized, often with literally millions of dollars of unaccessed. So that was one of the points that came out. That was one of the areas that could be done. And then on the things like the Challenge Fund, we are going to be able to set that Challenge Fund up. It will be dependent on donations from the private sector to be able to award prizes for somebody who comes up with the best solution for enabling digital logistics to work better in the rural space. So there's a multiplicity of different ways. And also people like the World Bank and Asian Development Bank are very keen on supporting some of these programs to enable those things to happen, such as a registry of farmers so that the ministries of agriculture know who their customers are and can service them better. Over.
Right. And it's wonderful what Grow Asia is doing, and all these different intergovernmental and governments and private sector organizations and the farmers themselves are coming together and how they're trying to look at addressing all these problems. How will we consumers be impacted if these problems are not addressed, though?
Well, the issues that will arise is if these problems happen again, what we've seen is a fragile food supply chain, so that we can have shortages, we can get more price rises. If we can make this thing operate, we will enable much more efficient local supply chains to operate, more money to flow into the rural area, which is where maybe 2 to 4 times the level of poverty is. And by being able to enable people to buy product in the rural space, we're not only enabling food to be delivered that people are demanding, but it also is the raw material for solving the problems of rural poverty.
Right. Grahame, thank you so much for highlighting to us the issues that we continue to, grapple with, and also all the good work that's being put in to ensure that we continue to have food supply and something that's also going to be sustainable, not just for now, but also in the long run as well. Grahame Dixie is the Executive Director of Grow Asia, a multi-stakeholder partnership platform bringing together Southeast Asia's smallholder farmers, governments, companies, NGOs, stakeholders, all to do develop inclusive as well as sustainable value chains and initiatives. And for our listeners, if you would like to check out more, do visit www.growasia.org. Grahame, thank you for joining us today on our program.
And thank you for a great set of questions.